So, first and foremost, I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining in to this episode of Lottie Spaces. My name is Austin. I'm one of the partnership and community managers here at LottieFiles, and I am here with the one and only Chris Derrell, head of web development at Adtelligent and also based in Kingston, Jamaica. So, this is the first or second time that we've actually had somebody within a reasonable time zone from Chicago, where I'm calling in from. So this will be a pretty good conversation. So the purpose, of course, of Lottie Spaces is to foster great discussions and have an exchange of ideas in order to help designers build epic careers. So the format is very simple. We're just going to do some introductions, introduce my guest here today, and give some context around the conversation that we're having. Then we're going to dive into some discussion questions, talk a little bit about, backstories, careers, and things like that. And then we will close it off with some closing points and call to actions for the audience, tips, tricks, pieces of advice, and things like that. So I want to give a more full introduction to Chris before I allow him to introduce himself. So, as I said before, Chris is head of web development at Adtelligent and is also an award-winning software developer who, within his role, manages UX, architecture, and development to create practical and aesthetic websites. So, Chris, I would love for you to give a more a better introduction than I can do, but I want to hear about your background, right? I want to hear, where did you grow up? How did you grow up? And I think more importantly, how do you think that where and how you grew up shaped you into the person that you are today and got you into the career that you're in today?
I think your introduction was a really good summary for sure. So let me add some more context to it. So my name is Chris Derrell. As Austin mentioned, I live here in Kingston, Jamaica, and I've lived here for about 10 years now. I came for university and I stayed, but I'm originally from Barbados, a beautiful small island in the Caribbean. My background is that after finishing high school, I left for Jamaica to do computer science and economics, and I stayed. This is my home now, and I've been working with Adtelligent for 6 years across many different disciplines. But at the end of the day, all of them have poured into the web development process, and I'm excited to actually discuss that today. Funny enough, my background really wasn't about design. Um, I'm not the kind of guy that's very interested in design, or I wasn't for a long time. Give me functionality with no design, and I'm happy. But that kind of took a change a couple years ago as my responsibility became not just functionality, but making sure that people enjoy the experience of using what we build. So yeah.
Yeah, that's an awesome background. So, tell us a little bit more about that designer journey. So, I think, when people are listening to this, they're kind of putting themselves into your shoes, right? Like they may have a similar background to where they left the place where they grew up at, or maybe they weren't as interested in design before and somehow they got into it. So, I would love for you to dive a little bit more into that journey as a designer. Like, when did you start to feel like, okay, I'm an actual designer? And also, like, when did you start to feel like, okay, I can start providing a service to the market and start making money doing this?
Yeah. So it's actually a very distinct point in time, and it wasn't that long ago. Probably a couple years ago when I moved into this role at Intelligent. But to get there, we have to go way, way back,
Let's do it.
because a lot of my inspiration has actually come from my dad, and he is not a designer. He's very techy, and he's had a lot of management roles in the tech industry in Barbados. So he was very practical. But one thing that he'd always do is sketch out something. So if he's going to build something on the house, if he's going to do some piping, if he's going to build his own projects, like his own shed, what he would always do is sketch out something very quickly and show me and explain to me the concept and where we're heading. It wasn't high fidelity. It wasn't, drawn in AutoCAD, but it always was able to communicate this is where this is supposed to go and this is what it's going to look like at the end. And that has stuck with me from childhood, honestly, because it showed how quickly you can get across a point with very minimal design. And that led me into my role now, which is head of web development, meaning not only do I have to do user experience planning, but I also have to lead teams of persons who do it as well. And that means you can't just say do UX or do a beautiful UI, you have to actually be able to explain to them what the endpoint will be. And that a lot of that came from the background that I had growing up with mom and dad.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love what you said about, how your dad would sketch it out and essentially show you where you're headed in terms of like practicality, right? And I think you talked about that before of like you're more into the practical part of things. Of course, you're into the design part of things, right? You have to be able to tell a story with what you're building. But as you said, you lead teams, you have to be able to inspire people and give them direction and be able to show them, okay, this is the way and this is how we want to go. I want to dial it back a little bit as well, because one of the questions I wanted to ask was about what your inspirations are. And obviously you said that your dad was a pretty big inspiration, but I want to dive into kind of like a subgenre of inspiration and talk about mentorship a little bit, because from the conversations that I've had within web development, because web development technically is still a pretty new area, right? 10, 15, 20
Yep.
years max type of thing. So, and for a large portion of that, we didn't have YouTube. We didn't have all these podcasts and resources to help people learn. So what I got was that a lot of people were kind of a lone wolf in a way, and they had to kind of learn things on their own. So what role did mentorship play in your design journey? Did you have any mentors outside of your dad that kind of guided you along the way into this field?
No, I love that. And I mean, even before I start answering that, I love that you said web development, right? Because the field not long ago used to be called website development. But the
Mm,
real name is web development, because what you're building are web facing applications. And so web development might cover the design of Airbnb's front page, where the front end developer is building that. But it also deals with some back end development as well. And so web development is much bigger than a website, which is just a group of web pages put together. So I love that you made that distinction. Uh, I would say that honestly, my biggest mentor would have been my dad. I don't take it for granted at all, because while he's here, I have to use him up. But I also definitely had a lot of other persons contribute to my growth as a designer. At the company at Adtelligent, for a long time, we had a director who had worked with Boston Consulting, and he by no means was a designer. But one thing he knew is he knew what he wanted to see, and he knew how to communicate with persons, right? He could make that emotional connection. And when I started out at Intelligent, I couldn't make that connection. I was very, very much functionality driven. And so what he would do to help me grow is, when we're building a website and say I've put a button on the page and it doesn't work the way he expects, instead of saying, "Hey, Chris, go and fix the button on the bottom of the homepage," he would say something like, "Chris, there's a broken button on the site." And I'd be like, "Yeah, where is it?" He's like, "It's on the site." And what it did is it caused me to go back to the site as a user and look for this broken button, like, all right, click this button, click this button, click this button. And until I found the broken link or broken button. And you learn the hard way, kind of like in the boot camp style, how to approach your website as a user would, and how to also test your website to make sure that it is functional for every user. And that greatly influenced my user experience journey, so much that we even created a list of test checkpoints that came out of that, and that we currently use at the company. So he was definitely a big inspiration, and he had a heavy hand in what the Adtelligent website looks like today at adtelligent.net. He definitely sent us back, and we had many revisions. And that's another thing. You have to be very patient in web development if you want to create a high quality product, for sure. One other quick one that I'd say in terms of mentorship is, I also have to give props to my CEO for sure, Craig. Craig has also been vital as a part of the journey in terms of not overthinking things. Because if you're a developer going into design, you can also fall into that rabbit hole of overthinking. And my CEO has been very clear on, let's get this out, let's get this done, setting timelines and deadlines so that, as much as you'd love to spend a year on it, you only have a week. And it shapes you up.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to dive into that topic there about functionality versus aesthetics, I guess you could call it. So there's actually a few different things that I wanted to talk about here, but I think the one that's more impactful in terms of like storytelling, right, is that you said your director who worked for Boston Consulting knew what he wanted to see and how to communicate that and to make that emotional connection, right? So
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you, when and why did you decide to add motion into your design process? Did you decide to add it because it was a mechanism to trigger more emotional connection within the user? Because, like you said, you had to go through the user journey yourself. So I could imagine, you're going through the user journey and then you're going through you're going through the user journey. You might have to edit that out. We're going through the user journey without motion, and then we're going through with motion, and we're seeing like, okay, in real time, this is a way better story that we're telling. So I just wanted to ask you, when and why did you decide to add motion to your design process in total?
Sure. For me, it was very easy. I first added motion to my design because I thought it was cool. It had no functional purpose at all. In fact, it didn't need to be there. I was just like, oh, this is possible. And the way that I saw it on a site, I saw it in a building of a site, and I'm like, you can do this. So it was strictly on the fact that this is cool and this is new, and it would make the site stand out. It didn't really have a functional purpose at the time. And so you can kind of tell that came in the last couple of years when I moved a bit away from just functionality to what's the experience that you can add to the site and how can you make it cool.
For sure, for sure.
Hmm.
And I guess the tangential question to that would be, can you share about how you came across LottieFiles specifically? Like what initially drew you to the platform? Like, was that your first interaction with intertwining motion, or did you go through a series of tools and then you came across LottieFiles and you were like, okay, this is the one that helps me out the most?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can't think of any tool that I stumbled across before LottieFiles in terms of adding web animation. So, and it actually happens. So, my background is I've been doing Wix development for about 6 years. And how I started out in Wix development was we had a client who needed a custom animation. Now, it was nothing big or nothing grand. We just needed to make something disappear when we hovered with the mouse and something else reappear. And we had to do a lot of coding to just handle the timing and making sure that no two things were invisible at the same time. And that was in 2017. So fast forward a couple years, I was helping out a friend on their WordPress website. You usually can't say Wix and WordPress within the same minute, but hopefully we should be good. And that was a long time ago, just in case. But
Mhm.
no, I was helping them out on their WordPress website, and I was using the Elementor plugin at the time. And I just remember seeing this option for this animation, this simple bicycle animation that would scroll with the page. So when you scroll down, it would go forward. When you scroll up, it would go backward. And I was
Mhm.
like, that is so cool. What is
Awesome.
this? And that was Lottie animation. And that's over 3 years ago now that I'm looking back in 2020.
So LottieFiles, of course, provides plugins for tools like Figma, Adobe After Effects, and now Canva as well for people that aren't into those type of intricate technologies. But I want us to talk about, what integrations did you use, or what integrations have been useful in streamlining your design and your workflow?
Yeah. So I guess the important thing to know is for me, when I got introduced to Lottie, like Lottie animations, was the same time that I got introduced to LottieFiles, the actual website where you could get all of these free plugins, free animations. And that's what stood out to me, that you had access to all of these animations for free that you could add to your site just to spruce it up. And I guess because they came at the same time, there was no other option for me. I was learning animation while I learned Lottie in terms of SVG animation. If anybody's been in the web design industry for long enough, they know that one of the hardest things to make sure you have for your site is a fitting loading animation. You can find a GIF online that looks like it's spinning and it could be gray. But from the time you want to make sure your animation is fit to your site, whether it has the right colors or it looks like Google's loading animation, it gets a lot harder. And I even remember there used to be a site that I used to go to. I think it was loading.io, which would have all of these GIFs that you could take and try and customize. But at the end of the day, when you're trying to scale them up, it never really worked out and they would get very pixelated. And so, LottieFiles.com having its own loading category, even small things like that really stood out for me, who has no experience in motion design and actually creating the animation, but needed them for the end product. That became my workflow, LottieFiles.com, and then adding them to Wix websites.
Mm. So before we dive into, I guess, what I would call like the closing section where we talk about, tips and pieces of advice and things like that, I would love for you to like pick a war story, right? I would love for you to, is there a specific project or a design challenge where Lottie Files played a pivotal role in terms of achieving that desired outcome? Like, was there a particular website that you were working on, or a particular like feature within a product that you were working on that you were like, I can't complete this without Lottie Files, or it would be very difficult to do it without this type of animation service?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll answer it two ways. In terms of actual web design, I'd say for sure, when we were starting out using LottieFiles, the one of the issues we had was that Wix didn't support LottieFiles at the time out of the box. If you wanted to add like custom animations and make sure that they scaled properly, there was no easy drag and drop way, which is Wix's way, to get the animation on your website. And so about that time, I spent months developing a plugin uh, that would allow you to add the animation to your site. And I even worked with the Wix team directly to publish on their actual blog how to add Lottie animations to your website in 2021. The first article about adding Lottie to your website from Wix, before they added their own plugin. And that took a while to figure out. Took a lot of web knowledge to make it easy for the user. So that's my personal war story. It may not be as exciting, not enough guns and blood, but but that one took a while, and I was glad to see how many people were able to use it and how people were sharing it and making videos off of the original article, which kind of leads me to the second thing, which is that what Lottie also does is it opens up animation to persons who have been thinking about animation but didn't know that Lottie was a possible way to ship something for web or for a mobile app. What do I mean by that? I can give you two quick examples. So we had a candidate coming for a junior position on my team, for the web team, and she had art experience from school, but no animation experience. But she wanted to go into animation. She actually wanted to go to SCAD in Georgia, and that's where she is now. But she brought this raw art talent and she had Figma experience. So I said, well, if you have both of these, I'm going to give you a challenge. I want you to build your first Lottie animation. No background in Lottie. All she knows is Figma. All she knows is art. But she was able to produce it. Now, mind you, this was I guess you could call it a small animation, but it was big for her. It was her first. And what I found was that she understood very quickly how to do the frames and the keyframing to create her Lottie animation. And I love that it was so easy that it could be part of my interview process. Another one was we had someone on the team who was a video editor and motion designer who had experience with After Effects. And I introduced him to Lottie as well. I showed him that this is something we'd like to incorporate with our sites. But I gave him challenges along the way. So every time he would get to one level, like creating a basic Lottie animation, I'd say, okay, can you create a 3D Lottie animation with the cube actually going on different sides instead of just 2D? He'd say he doesn't know, and then I challenge him and he'd get it done. Then I'm like, all right, can you make images come dynamically so I can fill in an image after you finish the animation? And he would get that done. To the point where the last one that I remember he did is he took the entire script of, you remember the Bee movie, Austin?
Yeah, the B movie, yeah.
Yeah, he took the entire script of the Bee movie and put it in a single line Lottie animation that lasted for like
Wow.
a long time. So it was a long loop, and it just scrolled across the screen. And what stood out is he just found a way to. I didn't tell him about the Bee movie idea. He just said, "I'm going to push the boundaries of what this platform can do to see what's possible with this animation library and use it in unconventional ways." And I think that because Lottie is so easy to use, both of those examples, they were able to get started really easily, even though they were fresh to the platform.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I want to touch on the collaboration part. So of course we talked about, the practicality of Lottie Files, and essentially it's opening up motion and it's opening up animation to people that, like you said, either didn't know or didn't think they could do it. But I want to talk about collaboration specifically, because you've been around long enough to understand that, we had this era of cloud services to where now we can share things, whether it's on Figma, After Effects, Canva, the base layer, I guess you could call it. But now you also see the portion to where we can work on this particular file together, or during the interview process, we can, it makes the interview process a little bit more efficient because we have this type of cloud collaboration software. So I want to hear from your perspective, what has collaboration, or what has the evolution of collaboration look like when it comes to web development?
Cool. So what I will say is, for any web developer, and especially those listening, there really are just a few tracks that you can do as a web development career person. You can be a dedicated developer where you're tied to one company. And so you are their go-to web developer. When they need to update the website, you're the guy or girl. You have freelance developers, persons who contract out to other companies, but they are solopreneurs. They're on their own. Then you have agency developers, which is like what we have, where you're working with many different industries. So you get a breadth of knowledge, and you get to learn a lot about things like hospitality and tourism just by being part of the agency. And then of course the last one is entrepreneurship, where you're taking what you have been building as a developer and you turn it into a business where you're hiring other persons rather than just freelance. As a web developer, I will tell you, as someone who's done all four of those, the one that really gets the most or the highest quality designs, in my opinion, is the agency developer. Because the agency developer has the benefit of persons above, below, and beside them. They can throw things out to their coworker and say, what do you think about this button? And their coworker may not be a developer. So they're able to give a perspective that you might not have seen yourself. You're like, oh, wow, I didn't think about that. Pink does represent breast cancer. So, we should actually make sure that that's highlighted on this website, or whatever the case may be. You get all these different perspectives from the people right next to you. And so for us at Adtelligent, collaboration has been important from day one, because we've had that benefit of really smart people in our space who have been able to give their eye to the design process, even if they couldn't tell you how to build it. They'd say, boy, something needs to change here, or this looks really good. And most times it's this looks really good. Just, want to throw that out there. But you get that beauty of collaboration because you can look left and look right and get that feedback. What I would say is, one of the big changes that I liked with the Lottie platform was a couple years ago, maybe 2 years ago, you guys released the ability to collaborate on designs. And so I did a video with, I wish I remembered his name, Anthony Raoul from India. And he and I did a video on designing a Canva killer, right? Something that would be a landing page where I would do the web development and he'd do the animation. We did it, pretty much in 10 minutes for the video. But in the actual, because, the behind the scenes process can be a lot more tricky than the actual video recording. Nah, it was so simple. He would just design it and say, Chris, is this what we're going to go with? I'm like, yeah, nice. And so having that collaboration ability on the platform was very helpful, especially for my reviewing of anything he did. And at the end of the day, web development, high quality web development, is a collaboration game. It's a team sport. It's not an individual sport.
High quality web development is a collaborative game. I 100% agree. And I appreciate you, because for the people listening, right, whether they're new or they're more, seasoned or veteran, whatever the case may be, positioning is important, right? I think a question that people have, that if they're just coming into this career field, is how do I want to position myself? Do I want to work on a team? Do I want to work by myself? And I think you touching on, the fact that you're able to ask this person, and that person pertains directly to positioning and how people can position themselves as they're evolving in their career. So I want to also touch on positioning from the technological side, right? Because you've been in the space and you've seen the evolution of the tools and the technology that you have at your disposal. And you understand, like, okay, some technologies may help me and some technologies may not. I want to ask, in this ever evolving field, how do you stay up to date with the latest technologies, and how do you continue to improve your skills? And I think an important question to that is, how do you determine what tools and technologies to pick up and which ones to leave behind?
That is a nice and nuanced question. I'll give my story for sure. Hopefully, you can find a rubric out of that. But for me, I read a lot. Uh, there's a there's a Bible verse that says that, pretty much there's nothing new under the sun in Ecclesiastes. And I find that 100% true. A lot of what we're seeing is cyclical, things that are happening now. Of course, we didn't have Chat GPT in the 300, 300 AD, but just the innovations and how you have these different industrial revolutions, it speaks to going back in time to learn what will be coming next. So I do read quite a few books, and it also helps you look for new trends. So I'll give you one example. There's a really nice book called The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman, and highly recommend. Designer, developer, you guys should read it. Read, not just listen to an Audible. Read it if you can, because what he does is he frames everything in its fundamentals. So everything has an affordance, something that tells you that you can grab it. So for those of you watching the actual video, this mic has an affordance where it tells you I can hold it, right? So you know that this groove here is something that you would hold just by the way it's designed. And when you start to see things based on how the book describes them, then even the fork, when you're eating your food, you're like, oh, that's why it's flattened out at the end. So I can just grip it like this and then scoop like this. And that 100% plays out in your web design. Whether you make your buttons thicker so people know this is to click, or you make subtle buttons right next to big buttons to say this is a primary action versus a secondary action. A book like that really helps you to see how things are right now and how things will be no matter what, because design principles usually stay throughout. And the second thing I'd say to that is I like to try out new things, and not wait till people try them out. So, and I think that that's a healthy habit. So if I see that the Oculus Quest can do this, instead of waiting till I see 100 reviews, I'll probably watch 5 more videos and say, all right, I need to try this for myself. And if I have the resources, then I'll try it out. And the beauty is that we're in a time where most of these new technologies give you a free plan that you can try out. And so the barrier to testing new technologies out is very low. And you'll know very quickly, most times, whether or not this is something that you want to continue using and take even further. So try stuff out.
Try stuff out and read, for everyone listening. And
100%.
2023 is like reading
Yeah.
is a technology of the past in some sense. So,
Oh gosh.
but so within that same conversation, what emerging trends, based on your research, right? What emerging trends or technologies do you think are currently shaping the design field that we may see play out in, I don't know, 2030 or something, right? Because through these conversations, some people say, AR and VR, and they're thinking about, okay, how do we instill motion and design and those type of platforms? But I want to hear it from you. What are you seeing nowadays, and what do you think people should pay attention to so that they can stay competitive, 5, 10, 15 years down the line?
Yeah. So based on what I've read, I will say that, just breaking it down to what's fundamental, anything that's going to impact a lot of people has to be in a lot of spaces. And so, as I say that, most of you already picked up that the smartphone is in most people's hands. We're no longer in a time where there's a large population that's not internet connected, nor are we in a space where most people are using SMS text message anymore. Most people use iMessage, most people use WhatsApp to communicate, and they either have an iPhone or an Android phone. So it's actually become very simplified. I remember when it was Sony Ericsson, Nokia, all these different operating systems. I had a BlackBerry Pearl. So I remember when it was very complex. Now it's really boiled down to pretty much 2 operating systems, which is good in a sense, because when developers are building new tools, they get to focus a lot more on just these 2 platforms. And that means they get to do a lot more development rather than going wide. So in that light, for web development, I think a couple big trends that we need to pay attention to are The biggest one is augmented reality. Um, Augmented reality being in the hands of persons who have smartphones should be something that persons should pay attention to. We haven't seen our big second wave of killer apps like how ChatGPT is to API is to AI. But I do believe augmented reality will be big, and we can just look at what Niantic did with Pokemon Go in 2016. That brought augmented reality into the hands of 100 million people who,
Mhm.
had never used it before. So augmented reality will be big, and it has to be practical so that persons can use it. So you can't expect to have them buy a $3,000 device to get access to it for it to be big. And I think designers should pay attention to that because the skills that are necessary for 2D design can be translated into 3D design, but there is a gap, and that gap requires some study. It's not gonna, You're not going to wake up and be able to do 3D design and know the difference between designing for a screen and designing for the real world. So augmented reality is a big one to pay attention to. Two other ones I'd say for web, we should pay attention to something called progressive web apps. It's an it's an old topic, and if you guys want to research it, definitely you can contact me or you can contact Google. Google knows a bit more than I do, so you should definitely talk to them first. But progressive web apps give you the ability to install a website as a native app with a lot of the functionalities that a native app would have on both platforms, on iOS and Android. And the beauty is that over time, they've been given a lot more functionality than they had in the past. So now they can access Bluetooth, now they can access NFC to do the actual payment transactions through a website that's on your phone rather than a native app. And so, again, developers are able to develop faster and distribute faster. And I think that that's going to be a big future trend, something that to look out for. And the last one is WebGL. WebGL is basically the API that your browser uses on your phone to render, sorry, on your device, phone or computer, to render high quality graphics. And recently, WebGL 2 was launched, which is going to allow a lot smoother video rendering on your device. And it opens up so many opportunities, not just for gaming, but for 3D design. Things like putting a Photoshop on the web or putting Unity in your browser instead of having to download an application on your device are possible because of WebGL 2. So those are three things I'd say we could check out for that I'm kind of excited about myself.
Wow. So full disclosure, I'm learning from the first time. This is the first time I'm really talking to you, and I'm learning so much right now, and I'm like very excited. But so I want to ask, because we talked about so many different things right there that I think are going to be super duper applicable, and I think people should really be paying attention to. And then we also talked about more of the career side and positioning and things like that. If you had to create a course, whether it's video, text, or whatever the case may be, but if you wanted to sum up your knowledge into the points that you care to talk about and the points that you feel like could provide value to other people, right? What would you talk about? Like, would you talk about the mobile development side? Would you talk about the hardware? Or would you more so focus on what you just mentioned with like progressive web apps and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And people say that's a great question when they're formulating their thoughts. That's a really great question. Honestly, I'd only want to speak on something that I have done. And so at this moment, if I was to do a course, it would be on building an MVP for a product, because that takes you beyond design. It takes you into the business development, into creating the pitch, into getting it into person's hands, communicating your value proposition, and then how design can help with that, right? So it's not just about having a great idea or trying to build a solution that's in search of a problem that doesn't actually exist. It's about finding the problem and looking at what are the ways that we can break this down to first principles to actually solve this. That is something that I have experience with because of this role, where you learn not just to take what you get as an instruction as the thing that you should do. So the client might say, make the images bigger. The client might say that they want a map on the homepage so people can find them. But you have to kind of stop and think, all right, what's the end point? The endpoint isn't having a map on the website. The endpoint is people finding them. What are the best ways that we can approach this? Should we just put a button saying uh, directions to our location? Is that easier for the customer? What if they're on mobile? So thinking through what is it you're trying to achieve versus what is it you were told to do. Uh, it is a learned process, and I'd love to break that down a little bit more. And then anything techie, anything web development.
Yeah. What is it you are trying to achieve versus what were you trying? What are you trying to do
Yeah, what is it you're trying to achieve versus what were you told to do?
versus what? I think that's very important because when people, especially like when you're new in the space and you have authorities over you that are telling you to do things, it's very hard to have that mentality of, I was told to do this, but we're trying to achieve this. So I think I should just go ahead and do this and maybe deal with the consequences later or whatever the case may be. You know, obviously people get put in those positions. So I think that it was very interesting that you highlighted that there. So,
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, because one weakness that developers have is most times developers don't know how to talk to people, and it is a problem because, and I'm coming from a developer background, we have an issue where communicating, especially communicating up, can be a problem because we've already overthought what the person's going to say back to us. Oh, they're going to reject the idea anyway. And then we ourselves have already over engineered the solution in our head. So sometimes we've already developed out, okay, it's going to take this long to do this. And if I'm going to do a custom map, I have to get this. When many times it's just about having a conversation. I mentioned my CEO, Craig, before. That is something that I've learned in speaking to him, that sometimes I'm saying this is going to take 2 weeks. And then I say, all right, this is what we actually have to do. And then we kind of figure out what we're trying to achieve, and it can take 3 days. Right. So developers communicating up especially, but just in general, is a big area that I think we need to grow in across the globe, because our work is usually very very siloed, because we can get a task and then work on it for a week. That ability to talk, just like what we're doing right now, isn't a natural thing. And you'll find that I've spoken to persons recently who said that they've hired a freelance developer, but when things get hot, the developer just disappears, right? And that's not a rare story. That's not the exception, unfortunately. But a lot of times, what's happening from the developer's point of view is that they just don't know how to communicate that, hey, I said it would have taken 3 hours, but it's actually going to take 30 just because I found this. And I thought that, my quote was accurate at the start, but now I realize we were way off. There's a lack of understanding of how to communicate to the client, hey, I was off with my estimate, but this is going to cost X amount more money. And then not be afraid of the response or the reaction of the client. There's a business element that developers usually lack. And I think that plays into what you just mentioned, is that it's very important that you know how to communicate. This is what we're trying to achieve, rather than just taking instruction all the time. There will be times you have to just do what you're told. And trust me, that's better a lot of the times. But you also need to be able to say, hey, I think that we could achieve this way, so that if it does come back around and somebody's like, why didn't you mention this 2 weeks ago? We could have saved a lot of time. You're like, well, you just told me to do this. That's not a real solution at all.
Yeah, I'm glad we got into this nuanced conversation because these are the nuggets that I feel like people are going to appreciate, is because everybody's going to be listening to this from their lens, from their perspective, from their problems, from the things that they're trying to find solutions to. And maybe they're trying to find a solution to the career piece. Maybe they're trying to find a solution to how to talk to their manager, how to talk to their client. And that's why I enjoy having these type of conversations, because you don't know the value nuggets that you're dropping until you meet somebody 3 years later and they're like, oh, you're Chris from the LottieFiles, the LottieSpaces podcast. And I
Yeah.
listened to what you said about how to communicate to my manager, and that allowed me to get up higher in the ranks and make more money, or whatever the case may be. So I really, really appreciate you for breaking that down for us. So honestly, we're at the end here. We're at the final question here, and it's just about advice, right? You've already given a lot of advice, tons of advice, but if you had to talk to your younger self, right? That's today in 2023, just now starting out and essentially talking to the next generation of designers, right? What advice or what pieces of advice do you want to leave them with?
Yeah. I like that question as well. Formulating my thoughts. What I, what I would say is across the board, be patient. There's a lot that, when you're in your 20s, you're like, all right, I got to finish this. My unicorn has to be up and running by I'm 23. And in some cases, that could be the case. And, as you put in the work, that might come out. But be patient with yourself. There's a lot you can learn from at that age from the persons around you. Be willing to listen. The Bible also says, let every man be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. For human anger can't produce the righteousness that God desires, right? And there's a big benefit in listening, not hearing, but listening to those around you. Because you also learn how to filter. You also learn how to take what is good and leave what is bad. And that will help you grow as a person. So, especially to the younger generation where the only thing they're listening to is their AirPod, uh, I would say definitely make sure you're listening to those around you, especially those who are older and have attributes of what you are looking to achieve yourself in the future. Couple other things I'd say quickly. Make sure that you're reading. I know that reading, as you said, has really gone out of style, but it's a it's an important thing to remember that leaders are readers, and if you want to lead, you need to read, and that's because you want to be informed when you're in a conversation. You want to actually have something to contribute that is different from what people saw on YouTube or different from what they heard on this podcast. You want to have some depth, and I think that that is something we lack. We have a lot of breadth. We can quote a lot, but when it gets to depth, that is something that the younger generation is missing. I'll mention quickly, in April, I had the opportunity to go to Brazil to Meta, and we had this expo where students from local schools would come to see what we were doing with the metaverse. And some kids asked the same question that you just asked, Austin. And I mentioned to them that they need to go deep because they're afraid that their degrees will be useless by the time they graduate. And it was high school, so associate's degree. And they're saying, boy, AI is going to be able to do all that we're able to do in computing. So does it make sense? And I was like, guys, just make sure you go deep. AI will be able to create the 3D model of the football for the virtual FIFA that's coming in 2030. But the physics of how the football spins, the way that you're gonna make the crowd celebrate, the way that the net needs to move, a lot of that comes from the depth of the persons who are writing into the AI code generator or talking to the designers. And so having depth through reading, very, very important for the next generation. And last and definitely not least, don't forget God. I mean, it's almost like he's on the way out, but he has a big impact, and I would definitely recommend that to my younger self and younger anybody. Uh, Make sure you pay attention as well to him.
Go deep on that contrarian knowledge, like you said, right? When you reach the point to where you can filter everything out and create your own opinions and come into conversations and discuss things that make people say like, whoa, I never thought about it like that, right? That's how you know you're on that trajectory, and that's how you know you're on that path to being successful. So I really appreciate what you're saying there. So that's pretty much it. So we're well, of course, where can listeners follow up with you at, and how can listeners support you if there is a means of supporting you?
Sure. Well, at this moment, you can support by just following. So most of the times I'll post on LinkedIn. So you can find my LinkedIn. It's LinkedIn Christopher.Derrell. You can search me up and you'll find me. I have a nice smiling face like this. So you'll know it's me. And I post tips, books that I've read and definitely recommend. So one of them was the one I mentioned from Don Norman, but there are a couple others that will teach you business, life skills, etc. So LinkedIn is a good place, and I've started to post on X a little more frequently as well. And X is Chris.Derrell.
Nice. You know, you're the first person that I've heard call it X in that Twitter. So, um,
Getting with the times.
yeah, getting with the times, 2023, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, for sure. I want to express my gratitude for you, Chris, for taking time out of your day, for coming to speak with me, educate the audience. Like I said, I'm sure people whether they got value from the communicative piece or the career building or the designing piece. Like, you've put some greatness into the universe. So I really appreciate you for being here and being vulnerable and sharing your story with us. So this is recorded, of course. It's going to be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. So wherever you're listening in from, go ahead, make sure to leave a like, add Chris on LinkedIn if you want to, reach out and have a more in-depth conversation. You could probably do that too. But other than that, that will conclude this Lottie Spaces. My name again is Austin. I am one of the partnerships and community managers here at LottieFiles, and I have been your host for today's Lottie Spaces.